Well, I'm here with Caitlin and Irvin to talk about the Roach Zapper. But first, Caitlin has an ARM Mac.
No, I do not have an ARM Mac.
An ARM PC, right?
An ARM PC, yes, a Microsoft PC nonetheless. So The Verge has an article written by Tom Warren talking about a new Windows dev kit, which is a ARM-based PC to run Windows. Now, Microsoft is transitioning Windows to be much more compatible with ARM. So you can put Windows on the new ARM, like Mac Minis and Mac notebooks and desktops and even servers. And in order to facilitate that, Microsoft is actually putting out its own ARM PC. Now, this ARM PC is not running Microsoft custom silicon. It is actually running a Qualcomm Snapdragon. And this is very exciting because it looks like this may sort of be the beginning of the end of x86 based hardware, where we maybe finally be sort of moving to something else. Unfortunately, it looks like what we're moving to is ARM, which is not a ton better than the x86 architecture. I would much rather we be moving towards RISC-V, but at the moment, ARM seems to be the biggest up and coming main platform due to its performance and the fact that it has been around for so long, much like x86. So for at least the time being, it looks like Windows is making a much stronger push towards ARM hardware, which means we're going to have much more exciting and newer devices to look forward to in the future, as well as better cross compatibility between Apple and mainstream PC products.
Wait, when is that Mac or when is that device going on sale?
So let's see. They launched it. They're launching it for $600. And it is available today in Australia, Canada, China, France, Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the US. So if you live in one of those countries,
there's finally a Windows ARM, like not a technical preview, but an actual Windows ARM then that we can all start using.
Well, yes, it's not so clear.
No, it is. Well, there's been Windows ARM PCs before. They've been tablets and stuff, and they've been niche machines. This is the first desktop, like real desktop, that Microsoft has put out. And this is much more of a developer's kit rather than a, go and buy something for your grandma kit. But, it's a desktop, it's running ARM. And if you want to get in on Windows on ARM early, as they make improvements to make it more mainstream.
But it sounds like it doesn't have like a full commercial version of Windows on ARM. It's got like some development stuff.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, it has. Well, I mean, it should have the full. So it has the Windows. It's part of the Windows Dev Kit 2023. Right. So it has like Visual Studio. I mean, it's really designed or pushed towards developers.
But I bet that's all developer preview level stuff, because that's what I downloaded and installed yesterday on the Mac Mini.
Really?
There is, yeah, and I got a Mac Mini in a virtualization, and they exist for Windows 10 and Windows 11, but it's not up to release. It's not up to general release software yet.
Right.
There's a developer preview, and there's some other kind of preview.
Right, and this is squarely towards the developer side of things, and I imagine, yes, it has the developer version of Windows on it, though it is an official Microsoft device. Yeah.
So the main thing is the hardware.
Yes.
And I've been hearing about this coming for years, and I'm glad to see it because I was amazed at the immense improvement from Intel to ARM on the Mac. The Mac M1 seems 10 times faster. The battery lasts longer. It's cooler. It just seems much, much better. So if Windows has a similar improvement, that would really be good.
It would be. There's, of course, just the transitional period that's going to be very painful.
Right.
Because in order to emulate x86 code, it needs to, take the extra processing power to emulate it. So unless your apps and stuff are specifically designed to run on ARM, it's not going to, you're not going to have a good time. The other thing too is that most ARM-based chip manufacturers focus on the mobile market. So finding a good desktop manufacturer of ARM chips is difficult, which is why Apple rolled their own silicon. It would be great if someone like Intel would roll their own, However, what Intel is banking on is what I said earlier, which is RISC-V, which I do agree is a better platform for PCs in general.
What's wrong with the Snapdragon? Why would you want to make your own processor instead?
Well, the Snapdragon, once again, is a mobile processor, designed for low power applications.
Yeah.
You can design the processor to be more efficient. So, I mean, an ARM processor doesn't have to be a, power efficient, low performant, processor. It can be really speedy and fast. It just has to be designed that way from the ground up. And unfortunately, most of Qualcomm's offerings are meant for more towards like the IoT device space.
Right. Okay. So they just haven't developed the right chips yet.
Right. But if, like I said, once Intel rolls out their mainstream ARM5s, I think that will be big. And ARM5, unlike ARM, RISC-V, unlike ARM, is completely open source.
Mhm.
And so anyone can develop for it. So i86, of course, is Intel, and x64 is still basically Intel. Not going to the big history of AMD and that. And then ARM actually is also, even though a lot of people make ARM chips, the specifications themselves are proprietary. So you need permissions and licenses to make ARM chips. RISC-V is the first mainstream processor that's really just open source, like open specifications, anyone can make it. And it would be great if we switched our main processors to that in our everyday lives. Unfortunately, it really does not seem to be, it seems to be losing ground to ARM. And if we do make the transition, it's looking like it's going to be from ARM to RISC-V, which is another transition. And all these transitions are so painful.
And did you have to some enormous benefit of RISC-V over ARM? And is there one?
Yeah, as far as I know, no. Performance wise, they're about the same. The only big difference, of course, is that ARM is proprietary, RISC is not. So it would be better, but you might be able to get cheaper chips, which might be enough to drive people towards RISC. But
wouldn't be enough for them to rewrite Windows for it.
No, I mean, I imagine they're going to make RISC-V Windows eventually. I mean, Windows has already been ported to everything. There used to be like PowerPC versions of Windows and stuff. I mean, it's not that it's a big project to port Windows, but it's not unheard of.
Well, now that I got Windows 11 running in UGM virtualization on my M1 on ARM, and it's the Windows 11 ARM preview, the one thing that really confused me is I went and installed random apps. I installed like Ollie Debug 1.1, which is 15 years old, and it just installs and runs.
Right.
How is that even possible? Were they compiling it's a pre-compiled binary? I didn't think I'd be able to get anything to run there without getting the source code and recompiling it for ARM. But that is not true. Standard Microsoft installers from 15 years ago go right onto the ARM-based Windows. How is that even possible?
Well, both Macs and Windows have a compatibility layer, which essentially just emulates
like Rosetta.
Rosetta.
Yeah. You think it's emulating x86?
Yes, it has to be.
That would seem like the only reasonable explanation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if I can detect that. That'd be interesting. Maybe if I look in the assembly code of the Ollie, I will find Intel instructions. And anyway, I'm exploring the system, trying to understand how it works.
Yes.
All right. Well, anyway, that's exciting. And this next one I thought was pretty amazing too. I learned fiber optics years ago and taught a lot of classes in it. And what they said was the theoretical upper limit of the amount of data you can move through single mode fiber optics is 100 terabits per second. And we never get close to that because it's too expensive to build the receiver and detector. But apparently that's wrong. Now they've gone far beyond that. Now they've gotten up to 1.8 petabits per second, which is 1800 terabits per second. And previously they had gotten up to 300 terabits per second with dense wavelength division multiplexing. And now they've been, these guys, there's a Register article about it. They have invented something called a frequency comb, European scientists have, which sounds like a new form of wavelength division multiplexing. It must be, they don't tell you how many, but it must be running an enormous amount of wavelengths together through the fiber to do this. And so they're at 1.8 petabits per second of data, and they sent that over several miles. So it's not, they're not joking. This is the sort of thing that could greatly improve the efficiency of undersea cables and everything else. They say this one cable is carrying more data than the entire global internet carries. So it does sound like an enormous step forward. Obviously, the transmitter and the receiver will be very expensive, but it'd probably be worth it for that amount of data. So anyway, I was interested to see that. And Urban's got an Apple 0 day.
Not so much an Apple 0 day as much as Apple patching for a out of bounds, right? With the latest update that went out everywhere, 16.1, iPad OS 16, and macOS Ventura are all out today. But today must have been fun for all Mac admins. Rolling out updates on a Monday. Better than the Friday, I guess, but still.
Does Apple even have a regular patch schedule? I think they don't.
No, they don't.
Yep.
Yeah, but this patch update was in line with the release of iOS or iPad OS 16 and macOS Ventura.
So you have to go up to those versions to get the patch, or is it for the earlier versions too?
It goes back to iPhone 8 and later. iPad Air 3rd generation, iPad 5th generation, iPad Mini 5th.
It doesn't, it depends on the hardware, not on the software.
Yeah, because there are some Mac hardware that's already obsolete or vintage. Like
Well, sure, but I mean, I would think the only thing you need to know the patch would apply to certain versions of iOS, not certain versions of hardware.
Well, certain pieces of hardware run up to certain versions of the software. That's how they keep you buying new stuff.
Really?
Right. Well, I'm not quite getting it, but that's all right. Because we got the all-important cockroach zapping laser to talk about.
Ooh.
We do. So this is every person's dream. Anyone who's ever had to deal with cockroaches. So the motherboard has an article written by Hannah Docker Loeb, and a researcher named Ildar Rakhtumatulin over at the Herat University created a device using machine learning. So they used an NVIDIA Jetson board connected to some lasers and a camera. And what this does is it detects cockroaches nearby. It then rotates the laser and then zaps the cockroaches from like 1.2 meters away. And so you just set this up in your house. I mean, this isn't a commercial product, but you can imagine in the future, you can buy one of these things that uses machine learning, and it's like an automatic like cockroach killer laser that, you know, could potentially like burn your eyes out, but it just goes around and like zaps bugs from a distance. That's amazing. That's awesome.
It sounds like you'd only need a minor alteration in the training regime to have the Terminator.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're looking at sort of the downside of this, yeah, we're making killer robots, but
how far is 1.2 meters?
1.2 meters is
4 feet.
About 4 feet.
4 feet for ancient medieval British people. Since when are you one of them?
I'm an American.
Yeah, it's the same thing apparently. Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, so the so yeah, this thing will totally just zap, zap insects on its own, which is so cool. It's the best way to kill cockroaches.
And what did he use for the laser?
Oh, it looks like he used a diode laser, like the kind you would get from, at least in the image from the article.
Diode lasers are powerful enough to kill a roach?
Apparently. I mean, you can get them up to like 20 watts.
Wow.
Which is enough to do like basic engraving. I mean, something like a CO2 laser would just be too bulky and too difficult to move around. So
would be, yes. Well, okay, so we're close to having a zap laser gun you could carry.
Or just put on the ground and automatically kill insects that wander in.
Yeah, but I'm waiting for Flash Gordon's blaster,
Yes. Well, I mean, you can make those already and get into a lot of trouble. The problem with these laser diodes is even though they're nowhere near as powerful as some of the most powerful lasers, they can still do some pretty good damage to your eyes. So you would not want to operate this device without safety equipment nearby. Not to mention if it zaps you, then you get burn marks. I
would think so. Yeah. All right. Well, you were talking about the new chips being invented, and they just passed the CHIPS Act in Congress to try to encourage American chips manufacturers, but apparently there are serious problems. The Economist has an analysis of it and a graph showing that the value of the American semiconductor market peaked halfway through 2021 at 3.5 trillion, and it has now fallen to 2 trillion. And they say the problem is even the government stimulus, which is not that big, is not going to help very much The problem is they had a chip shortage. Now they have a huge glut of old chips nobody wants. And now that they've blocked exports to China, they can't get rid of the glut of chips that nobody wants. And it's taking a long time to ramp up to make the new chips that people want. And the problem is people keep changing what they want. So they're having difficulty predicting what to make, and they're having difficulty funding the building of new plants they want to, since the market appears to be falling. So anyway, it seems like the government's attempt to stimulate this is probably not enough to overcome the general negative outlook for developing new chips right now. And so we'll see what happens. And it does seem like our increasing hostility towards China and trying to block imports from China and exports to China is going to just make this much harder over here, and probably much harder in China too. So I already know people are telling me that when they buy a new car, they have to wait 18 months to get it because they can't get the chips. And it doesn't sound like there's any relief in the short term coming for any of that.
Right. I mean, not only do they have to deal with the, supply chain stuff, which, as you mentioned, is improving, but just getting a new factory online, even if you have a factory ready to go get it, actually producing the chip and everything, could take upwards of like 2 years of lead time.
And in that time, the market changes and it turns out you're not building the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So, Irvin, what is this deal of searching old CDs?
Apparently, the Internet Archive now has a section as they are uploading CDs, DVDs, and floppies for you to search, for you to download and use.
So they just found a bunch of old archives of CDs and they're digitizing them and putting them online.
Yep, that is correct. I was browsing through it the other day. Actually, pretty cool. There's like Windows installers and AOL discs and all kinds of goodies in there.
You could have AOL disks and now you can have GeoCities web pages, but the question is, why does anybody want those things?
Because there are some people who still want to use the old stuff for kicks and giggles, I guess. Who knows?
Perfect. Anyway.
Right? I mean, there's some people who code in COBOL, but I don't know anybody.
Well, okay, you got a point there. All right. All right. And so Caitlin's got the GitHub repositories full of malware.
Yeah. So we've all, if you work in the security field, you've all been guilty of this. You are hacking into a system and you need some exploit. You go onto GitHub and you find one that looks good. You don't do a full code review of it. You just might open up the source file and say, okay, it looks good, whatever. Then you run it. Turns out that might not be the best idea. Why is this? Well, there's an article talking about a paper, so I'll go over them both really quickly. So Bleeping Computer has an article written by Bill Toules, which links essentially to this article, to this paper written by Sufan Al-Yadami, Robin, the Robin. I love security papers. The Robin, Olga Gadistakia, and the Leiden Institute of Advanced Computer Science at Leiden University. And basically what this paper goes over is they looked on GitHub for various proof of concepts exploits, and then they would run the exploits and look to see if they would, for example, contact domains that are known to be malicious and download code. And they found that a lot of them would encode like base64 payloads to go and like fetch malware to put on the machine that's running the proof of concept exploit. So they have here like base64 analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found is hundreds of these repos on GitHub that essentially, goes out, tries to go onto these blacklisted domains, download malware, and run it on the researcher's computer. So this is basically an attack on the malware, researchers and security professionals through GitHub. And like I said, this isn't like an isolated one-off thing. There are hundreds of these exploits, to, for example, take over like a Bluekeep. But when you run it and you try to get a shell, you're actually creating a shell on your machine back to some attackers. And by your machine, you're probably running in a virtual machine, Kelly. I don't know how effective this is. I don't know how many people are like running this on their bare hardware. But if you're running this in like a corporate environment, like you're a red teamer in a corporate environment, you run this, they could potentially then get access to the corporate environment as well, which would be bad, even if they are in a virtual machine.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I certainly hope anybody downloading like exploits from unknown vendors droves to treat that as malware and put it in your isolated malware analysis sandbox.
I mean, you would hope so, but as red teamers, if you see that if you're trying to like exploit a specific bug or check for a specific bug on a specific system, you might just go to Google, say, I need an exploit for Bluekeep. And then you get to a GitHub repo, which has proof of concept, looks good. You run it. And
you're connected to a real client while you're doing it, aren't you?
And then another person then takes over your gets shell access to your system. So
yeah, and they said they used really weak detection procedures like virus total and known bad command and control server. And they said even with those weak techniques, they found that 10% of the POCs had malware in them.
Yep.
So 10%. It's a pretty large risk. Yeah.
Yeah. Thousands, they said actually deliver thousands of these GitHub repos, not just hundreds, thousands have this. So it's pretty bad.
Yep. I'm glad I'm not that red teamer. I don't really have to worry too much about that. Anyway.
I mean, you would hope that, things like Metasploit don't have this, but you never know where the developers are getting their proof of concept code from. And it's entirely possible that it could slip into even, legitimate products.
Well, I think they would catch it eventually and take it out.
They would catch it eventually, but when is eventually, and is it too late?
Yeah. Well, that's as much security as you ever get.
Yep.
Anyway, in phys.org, they've got an article with an entangled matter wave interferometer. And this is kind of mind-blowing. They're using quantum entanglement to make an interferometer. So they take I think it's done with light, but anyway, they take two particles in a receiver and they move them through a little path and then bring them back. And since they're entangled, they interfere with each other and they can detect very subtle changes in the environment this way. So this would be a way to make an extremely sensitive sensor called a matter wave interferometer. Use pulses of light to cause atoms to simultaneously move and not move, and make them entangled. And then you move them apart and bring them back together and see how they entangle. And you have a very sensitive detector, more sensitive than anything measuring the motion of two little particles are. So they were able to measure the acceleration due to gravity, for example, and so on. So anyway, it's a new way to make an extremely sensitive probe, and sounds great. And of course, I think it'll have a lot of side effects to use these things for qubits and quantum computers and so on. As we get more and more quantum devices that are practical, a lot of new applications will appear.
I was going to say, the one question that I have is how fast can it essentially create the entangled pairs and then read the data off of them? Because that's another important thing, is not only can we do it, but how quickly can we do it? Because it's not very feasible if it takes like an hour to
Oh, I'm sure it's very fast, because the fundamental problem with all quantum entanglement is it decays very fast. So that's why I have to cool everything to absolute zero. So I'm sure you're talking about a fraction of a second.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Urban has got Ubuntu putting ads on it again.
Yes, they stopped and now they have returned.
They did this like 10 years ago. They put ads on a desktop and everybody screamed.
Yep. So just like Microsoft, they're at it again. So whenever you do updates, it'll tell you, hey, try Ubuntu Pro. Right, it's just showing up in the terminal very, very briefly, flies away pretty quickly. There is a way to, I think, comment out a line in a file or comment out a file that you won't get that.
Oh, it's just a line in the terminal going by during installation. That's not very intrusive. I mean, before there were like banner ads graphically on your desktop.
No, we're not talking about banner ads, but that's the whole point of the argument, is if everybody lets them continue with doing that, And the next step is to put the banner ads back.
Well, this is America. They have to have some way to make money.
Yes. But that's what has anchored people, is the slippery slope of ads.
Basically, they're communists.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. All right.
As always, the push to go somewhere else, like Arch Linux.
Yeah, and I wonder who pays for Arch Linux.
I don't know.
The end users do in their time.
Yeah, it does cost a lot of human life, but the developers too.
Yep.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Friday.